the wealthy man disguised as poor to test his heirs. Only the kind Maid inherited everything. The grand hall of Thorn Manor, a monument to wealth and understated power, was quiet save for the hushed whispers of legal counsel and the nervous coughs of the assembled family. Every polished surface, every glimmer of the antique chandeliers, seemed to hold its breath, reflecting the tension that hung in the air like a thick, expensive drape. In the center, almost obscured by the imposing mahogany desk that had served generations of Thorns, sat a figure who, moments ago, had been an object of derision and annoyance to many in the room. His clothes, once tattered and stained, were now crisp and bespoke, tailored to perfection. His posture, once stooped and frail, was now erect, radiating an authority that silenced even the most jaded among them. This was Augustus Thorn, the reclusive billionaire, and the architect of the intricate, cruel, and utterly brilliant charade that was about to conclude. His gaze, once veiled by a convincing fog of feigned senility, now held a piercing clarity, missing nothing, judging everything. He felt a quiet, almost clinical satisfaction at the expressions he observed. A subtle, knowing smirk played on his lips as his eyes, sharp as a hawk's, swept across the faces of his grandnephew, Barnaby Thorn, and Barnaby's immaculately dressed wife, Lorelei. They, along with a handful of other distant relatives and long-serving staff, had been summoned for what they believed was a final, crucial meeting regarding the rapidly deteriorating health of the ailing patriarch. They had anticipated a eulogy, perhaps, or a formal announcement of a will that would finally release the floodgates of Augustus's immense fortune, allowing them to claim their long-awaited inheritance. What they received, instead, was a chilling, deliberate silence, thick with unspoken accusations and the weight of their own culpability. He knew the thoughts that churned behind Barnaby's confident facade, the calculations that flickered in Lorelei's carefully made-up eyes. They saw only an opportunity, not a man. The game, it seems, Augustus's voice, once a feeble rasp, now boomed with surprising clarity, resonating with power that seemed to vibrate through the very foundations of the manor, is over. His words, sharp as cut glass, sliced through the stifling air, leaving a void where anticipation had been. Barnaby, still adjusting his silk tie with a practiced air of superiority, chuckled dismissively, a sound laced with the condescension that had become his default response to anything that challenged his perceived authority or upset his meticulously planned future. Lorelei, ever the silent co-conspirator, merely offered a tight, patronizing smile, her eyes already calculating the value of the rare Persian rug beneath Augustus's expensive leather shoes, her mind already furnishing the rooms with her own acquisitions. They had no idea. Not a single inkling. They saw only an old man, perhaps momentarily lucid, perhaps suffering from another delusion, clinging to a fleeting moment of power before succumbing to the inevitable. The irony of their obliviousness was almost palpable, hanging in the air like a thick fog. The very individual they had so casually, so cruelly, dismissed as a senile burden, a potential drain on their imagined inheritance, now sat before them, the puppeteer finally revealing the strings. Their future, their every expectation, hung precariously on the precipice of a truth they were utterly unprepared to face. The stage was set, the final act about to begin, and the audience, quite unwittingly, consisted of the very subjects of the play. Augustus felt the weight of their judgment, their disdain, their greed, and it only hardened his resolve. This moment, the unveiling, was the culmination of years of quiet disappointment and months of meticulous planning. To truly understand the elaborate theatricality that had just unfolded, one had to delve into the quiet despair that had settled over Augustus Thorn in the twilight years of his life. He was a man who had built his empire, Thorn Renewables, from the ground up, with nothing but an idea, relentless grit, and an unwavering belief in a sustainable future. From the humble beginnings of a single wind turbine prototype in a drafty garage, he had forged an industrial giant, a testament to his vision and his iron will. He had seen fortunes rise and fall, witnessed loyalty bought and sold in cutthroat boardrooms, and navigated the treacherous waters of corporate ambition, where trust was a commodity and betrayal a common currency. Yet, no betrayal, no cutthroat business deal, had wounded him quite as deeply as the slow, insidious erosion of his faith in his own family. A deep loneliness had often gnawed at him, a realization that the empire he built had outlasted the genuine connections he craved. Augustus had no direct heirs. His only daughter, a bright and compassionate soul named Clara, had passed away decades prior in a tragic accident, leaving him with an immense void that no amount of wealth could fill. Her memory was a constant, bittersweet companion, a reminder of the kindness and integrity he had hoped to see reflected in his legacy. He had, for years, observed his extended relatives with a keen, discerning eye. Lunches at the manor, holiday gatherings, even casual phone calls, each interaction was, for Augustus, a quiet audition. He sought not brilliance, nor even ambition, for those he had in spades himself. He understood the drive for success, but he also knew its pitfalls. What he truly sought was genuine empathy, a flicker of true compassion, a spark of selflessness that transcended the glitter of his immense fortune. He sought a heart. A heart like Clara's. But time and again, he found only a gaping void. Barnaby Thorne, his grandnephew, had emerged as the most prominent contender, not through merit or affection, but through sheer, unadulterated persistence and a relentless pursuit of proximity to wealth. Barnaby and his wife, Lorelei, were a meticulously curated duo of avarice, a perfectly polished reflection of everything Augustus had come to despise. Their visits were frequent, their smiles practiced, their compliments saccharine, tasting of artificial sweeteners. They spoke of Augustus's health with feigned concern, their voices dripping with an insincere sympathy, while their eyes, Augustus noted, invariably drifted towards the antique paintings, the rare sculptures, the very symbols of the wealth they coveted, mentally cataloguing them as their future possessions. He frequently overheard hushed conversations about investment portfolios, about potential mergers, about how Augustus's affairs should really be managed by someone more capable, meaning Barnaby, of course. They subtly, yet relentlessly, tried to gain control, always under the guise of helping the aging patriarch, whose faculties they openly disparaged behind his back. The turning point came during a particularly dispiriting family dinner, a lavish affair held in the manor's ornate dining room. Augustus, feigning a moment of weakness, had subtly mentioned the precarious state of his health and the urgent need to finalize his will. The immediate shift in the room was chilling, almost cinematic in its suddenness. The genuine, albeit fleeting, expressions of concern vanished from the faces of his relatives, replaced by a barely concealed scramble for positioning. Barnaby, ever the opportunist, began to speak of family legacy, and the importance of preserving the Thorne name, his words a thinly veiled euphemism for carving up the pie. Lorelei chimed in, offering unsolicited advice on how to streamline the estate, her suggestions invariably leading to a greater concentration of power and assets in their hands. Later that evening, Augustus, retreating to his study under the pretense of fatigue, deliberately left the door ajar. He overheard Barnaby and Lorelei openly discussing how they might encourage Augustus to appoint Barnaby as his primary executor, and perhaps, subtly, restrict other, less favored relatives from significant inheritances. Their words, devoid of warmth, calculating and cold, were a final, bitter pill. He heard Lorelei scoff at the suggestion of a distant cousin needing assistance, dismissing them as parasites. It was then that a painful clarity settled upon him. His family saw him not as a person, but as a vault. It was then that the seed of the plan took root. If his family could only see him as a financial asset, then perhaps he needed to strip away the wealth, the power, the very identity they clung to. He needed to become nothing, a burden, a drain, to truly see the depths of their character. The plan was meticulously conceived, drawing on Augustus's formidable strategic mind, honed over decades of high-stakes business dealings. He would feign a rapid decline in health and memory, a believable narrative given his advanced age and the subtle, pre-existing conditions he possessed. Doctors, carefully chosen and sworn to absolute secrecy through ironclad non-disclosure agreements and substantial retainers, would corroborate the facade, issuing reports that painted a picture of a man steadily losing his grip on reality. He would then escape his own mansion, a well-orchestrated disappearance that would send ripples of panic, and opportunistic glee, through his family and the wider social circles. His reappearance would be as Arthur, a frail, disoriented old man in tattered clothes, claiming to be a distant, impoverished relative seeking help. He chose a name that was common enough to be plausible, yet distinct enough from his own. His appearance would be transformed, not just by meticulously selected threadbare clothes, but by professional stage makeup applied with subtle skill, by a feigned tremor in his hands, by a vacant, slightly unfocused look in his eyes that would suggest fading cognition and a weary spirit. He would intentionally make himself a nuisance, a dependent, a figure who would test the boundaries of human compassion, a mirror reflecting the true nature of those around him. He would specifically seek out his own family, his loyal staff, his longtime acquaintances, to see who, if anyone, would offer a hand without expectation of reward. He had arranged for a temporary, discreet residence nearby, a small, unassuming cottage nestled in a secluded patch of woodland, where he could retreat if needed, away from prying eyes. His personal effects, his true identity, were secured there, a sanctuary from the charade. A trusted, long-serving lawyer, Mr. Finch, was the only other individual privy to the full scope of the deception. Mr. Finch, a man of impeccable discretion and unwavering loyalty, had served the Thorne family for over 40 years, handling Augustus's most sensitive affairs. He was tasked with observing and meticulously documenting the proceedings from a distance, taking notes on every interaction, every word exchanged. Crucially, he was also tasked with the preparation of a new will, one that would reflect the true findings of Augustus's ultimate test, an instrument of justice to be wielded at the appointed time. The grand mansion would become a stage, its inhabitants unwitting actors, and Augustus, the playwright, observer, and ultimately, the judge. He was not merely seeking an heir, he was seeking a human being, a soul worthy of the legacy he had forged. The escape was executed with the precision of a military operation, planned down to the minute details. One blustery Tuesday morning, after a period of increasingly erratic behavior orchestrated by Augustus, he simply vanished from Thorne Manor. The alarm was raised by his personal nurse, a kind woman named Mrs. Davies, who was genuinely distressed by his apparent decline. She genuinely believed him to be suffering from severe dementia, and her cries of alarm were authentic. Police were called, a missing persons report filed, and the news, discreetly at first, then more widely, began to spread through the local media and, eventually, national tabloids, which gleefully speculated about the missing billionaire. The family, led by Barnaby and Lorelei, put on a grand show of concern for the public eye, organizing highly visible search parties and issuing tearful pleas to the media, all while secretly consulting their lawyers about the implications of Augustus's incapacity on their inheritance. He heard their feigned anguish on the news, saw their crocodile tears, and felt only a cold certainty of their true motives. Days later, after the initial frenzy had somewhat subsided, a disheveled, trembling figure appeared at the gates of Thorne Manor. He was Arthur, a man whose once sharp features were now obscured by a thick, grey beard that added years to his appearance, whose designer suits were replaced by ill-fitting, threadbare garments sourced from local charity shops, and whose commanding presence had given way to a perpetual stoop, as if burdened by unseen sorrows. His eyes, though still intelligent beneath the careful makeup, were veiled with a convincing fog of confusion and a profound weariness that made him seem utterly broken. He spoke in a soft, halting voice, claiming to be a distant cousin, Thorne from the poorer side of the family, who had heard of Augustus's disappearance and, having nowhere else to go, hoped for some temporary shelter. He had perfected the slight tremor in his hands, the hesitant gaze, the air of quiet desperation. The first to encounter Arthur were the security guards, burly men employed by Thorne Manor. Trained to keep out vagrants and uninvited guests, they were initially wary. But Augustus, with a performance honed over weeks of solitary practice in his secluded cottage, managed to evoke just enough pity and familial connection to be allowed inside the outer perimeter, to speak to someone in charge. He was directed, predictably, to Barnaby and Lorelei, who had, in Augustus's absence, largely taken over the day-to-day running of the estate, already envisioning it as their own private domain. Barnaby had even started rearranging Augustus's prized art collection. Barnaby, ensconced in Augustus's study, surrounded by ledgers and legal documents he was not truly qualified to manage, barely looked up when the house manager ushered Arthur in. "Yes, what is it?" he snapped, his voice tight with the stress of managing what he perceived as a crisis, but also the thinly veiled thrill of impending wealth. He dismissed the disruption with a wave of his hand. Lorelei, seated elegantly on a chaise lounge, filing her nails with a meticulous precision, arched a perfectly sculpted eyebrow, her expression one of utter disdain. Arthur shuffled forward, his hands clasped nervously in front of him. "My apologies, sir, madam," he began, his voice raspy, cultivated to sound old and worn. "I am Arthur Thorne. A distant cousin. My grandmother was a Thorne. I heard about Augustus. I mean, Mr. Thorne. I've fallen on hard times, and with him gone. I thought, perhaps, family might offer a little succor." He allowed a touch of vulnerability to creep into his voice, a hint of desperation. Barnaby's eyes narrowed, scrutinizing Arthur from head to toe. He looked him up and down with an expression of thinly veiled disgust, as if a noxious odor had invaded his pristine study. "A Thorne, you say? Never heard of you. Look, old man, we have enough on our plate right now. My granduncle is missing. This is hardly the time for charity cases." He gestured dismissively towards the door. "Lorelei, darling, do you know anything about this man?" Lorelei, without even deigning to look at Arthur, waved a perfectly manicured hand, her dismissiveness absolute. "Preposterous, Barnaby. We have quite enough relatives already, thank you very much. And all of them, thankfully, are quite well-to-do. This is clearly a grifter. He's probably heard about Augustus's disappearance and sees an opportunity to exploit the situation." Her voice was like ice, sharp and cutting, each word a calculated blow. The irony of Lorelei's accusation, delivered to the very man she sought to defraud, was a particularly bitter drop in Augustus's cup of observations. He noted the casual cruelty, the complete lack of basic human decency. Arthur feigned a tremor, a slight cough, as if the cold air from outside had permeated his very bones. "But I am a Thorne. My family, we lived in the north, near the old coal mines," he trailed off, allowing his eyes to wander around the opulent room, as if overwhelmed by the sheer wealth, the stark contrast to his own fabricated poverty. Barnaby slammed his hand on the desk, making Arthur flinch dramatically. "Enough. We have no time for your stories. Security. Escort this man off the premises. And make sure he doesn't come back. We don't need any more complications." The house manager, a stern-faced woman who had worked for Augustus for years, looked apologetically at Arthur as she gently but firmly guided him towards the door. She had known Augustus long enough to sense something was amiss, but her duty compelled her to obey Barnaby, who was, after all, currently in charge. Barnaby and Lorelei immediately returned to their discussions, their voices growing louder, focusing on how to control the narrative of Augustus's disappearance and accelerate the probate process. "Honestly, Barnaby," Lorelei mused, her voice a low purr, "the nerve of some people. Appearing here now, of all times. It's almost as if he's trying to complicate matters." They both laughed, a dry, mirthless sound, oblivious to the fact that they were complicit in their own downfall. Augustus, still in his Arthur persona, was led out of the mansion and told not to return. He found himself on a bench just outside the gate, feigning despair, allowing his shoulders to slump and his head to hang low. The day was drawing to a close, and a chill wind began to bite, cutting through his thin, rented jacket. He watched as the grand gates of Thorne Manor, symbols of the wealth he had built, closed firmly against him, a physical manifestation of his family's rejection. The callousness was exactly what he had expected, and yet, witnessing it firsthand, directed at himself, was a unique kind of pain, a deep-seated ache of profound disappointment. As dusk deepened, a figure emerged from the servants' entrance, carrying a small, wrapped parcel. It was Elara, the quiet, kind-hearted housemaid who had served the Thorn family for years. Elara was a woman of simple means, her wages modest, her work demanding and often thankless. She lived a life of quiet diligence, often overlooked by the grandiosity of the manor, rarely praised for her tireless efforts. She was known among the staff for her gentle nature, her unassuming grace, and the quiet dignity with which she carried out her duties, never complaining, always doing her best. Augustus had always observed her with a detached appreciation, noting her efficiency and pleasant demeanor, but now, he would see her true character shine. Elara approached Arthur cautiously, her footsteps barely disturbing the gravel path. She had overheard parts of the exchange from the kitchen, the harsh words from Barnaby and Lorelei, and she had seen the old man's dejected departure. Her heart, pure and unburdened by greed or ambition, felt a pang of sympathy for him. She knew what it was like to be an outsider, to feel invisible, to be dismissed. "Excuse me, sir." Elara's voice was soft, barely a whisper, yet it was laced with a genuine concern that immediately warmed the coldness in Augustus's chest, a warmth he hadn't felt from a human touch in years. I heard what happened. It's not right, sending an old man away like that, especially when he claims to be family. She held out the parcel, her hands, though calloused from work, gentle and steady. "I wrapped up some dinner for you. It's just some leftover stew and bread, but it's warm. And a thermos of hot tea. It's going to be a cold night." Arthur looked up, his feigned confusion momentarily replaced by a flicker of genuine surprise that he quickly masked. Oh, thank you, child. You are too kind." He took the package, his fingers brushing hers. He felt the warmth of the thermos, the simple humanity of the gesture. "And," Elara continued, her voice barely a whisper, her eyes darting towards the manor house to ensure no one was watching, "I found an old blanket in the linen closet. It's not much, but it might keep you warm. There's a sheltered spot, just behind the old gardener's shed, where the wind doesn't quite reach. You could rest there for a while." She gestured vaguely towards the corner of the vast estate, a gesture of quiet defiance against Barnaby's orders. "They won't see you from the house." Augustus, in his disguise, felt a profound wave of emotion wash over him. This woman, who had nothing to gain, who risked the ire of her employers and potentially her job, offered him not just sustenance but dignity. He, the billionaire, was being shown more humanity by a housemaid than by his own blood relatives. It was a stark, undeniable contrast. "May God bless you, young woman," Arthur said, his voice thick with genuine emotion that almost broke his facade. He had to clear his throat to maintain the raspy quality. "What is your name?" "Elara, sir," she replied, offering a shy, genuine smile, a beacon of light in the encroaching darkness. "Just Elara." She then hurried back towards the manor, her small act of kindness a profound statement, an unwritten testament to her character. Over the next few days, Arthur continued his pathetic charade. He would reappear near the mansion, sometimes in the nearby town of Oakhaven, always looking lost and bewildered, a ghost of a man. Barnaby and Lorelei, exasperated by his persistent presence, escalated their cruelty. They instructed the security guards to be more forceful, to threaten him with police intervention if he didn't leave. Barnaby even once threw a small amount of money, a paltry sum that wouldn't even cover a single meal in a decent restaurant, at Arthur's feet, telling him to go bother someone else. He watched with a grim satisfaction as Arthur stumbled to pick up the coins, solidifying their belief that he was nothing more than a desperate beggar, easily bought off and dismissed. They never once questioned his identity, their self-absorption was too complete. One evening, Augustus, still as Arthur, was intentionally lingering near the back entrance, making himself visible to the staff who were finishing their evening duties. He heard Barnaby and Lorelei, returning from a lavish dinner party in the city, discussing him with open contempt as they passed by. "That old fool is still hanging around," Barnaby grumbled, his voice echoing slightly in the quiet evening air, annoyance clearly etched on his face. "I swear, he's like a bad smell we can't get rid of. We need to do something more permanent. Perhaps call social services and have him taken to a home far away." He spoke of Arthur, as if he were a piece of refuse. Or, Lorelei purred, her voice dripping with malice, a chillingly calm suggestion, "We could suggest to security that he might be a nuisance and a potential threat to the family's privacy. A little rough handling might convince him to move on. Augustus certainly wouldn't want a vagrant disturbing his peace, were he here." The irony was truly exquisite. They were discussing how to remove him, the very man who held their fates in his hands, with such casual disregard, such cold calculation. Augustus felt a surge of cold fury, quickly suppressed. Meanwhile, Elara, who was often the one to open the back door for the returning family, would discreetly leave a small package for Arthur whenever she could, ensuring Barnaby and Lorelei were out of sight. Sometimes it was a sandwich and an apple, meticulously wrapped, other times a warm cup of soup in a sturdy container. She would always say a few kind words, asking if he was all right, if he had found somewhere warm to sleep. She even, once, pressed a crumpled $5 bill into his hand, whispering, "For a cup of coffee, sir. Please. It's too cold to be out here." Her eyes, though tired from long hours of work, were always full of a clear, unwavering compassion, a genuine concern that stood in stark contrast to the greed that permeated the manor. Augustus noted everything. He noted the security guards, who, despite their orders, often looked away when Elara slipped him something, a quiet acknowledgement of her kindness. He noted the other staff, some of whom seemed to pity him, but none dared to defy Barnaby and Lorelei openly. It was only Elara, the quiet maid with nothing to gain, who consistently showed him kindness, not because he was a thorn, not because he was rich, but because he was a fellow human being in need. Her actions were not calculated, they were innate. She saw him not as a problem to be solved, or a threat to be removed, but as someone who needed warmth, food, and a kind word. She saw the man, not the facade. This profound difference in behavior solidified Augustus's decision, making it as clear and unyielding as the bedrock beneath his vast empire. His vast wealth would not go to those who coveted it, who measured human worth by bank accounts. It would go to those who truly understood compassion, to a heart untainted by greed, to the one person who saw beyond the tattered clothes and the feigned confusion, and recognized the inherent dignity of another soul. The test was complete. The verdict was rendered. His vision for his legacy, once clouded by disappointment, was now crystal clear. The day of the official reading of Augustus Thorne's provisional will arrived. Barnaby and Lorelei had pushed for this, citing Augustus's continued disappearance and presumed incapacity, eager to finalize their control over his assets. They had gathered the select few relatives who stood to inherit, along with Mr. Finch, the long-standing family lawyer, who maintained a solemn, unreadable expression, his face a mask of professional impartiality. The atmosphere in the grand drawing-room of Thorne Manor was thick with anticipation, barely concealed excitement, and a touch of the morbid, as if they were vultures circling their prey. Barnaby, dressed in a sharp, expensive suit, adjusted his cufflinks with an air of self-importance, a smug smile playing on his lips, already picturing himself as the master of the house. Lorelei, in a designer dress that shimmered with quiet opulence, sat beside him, her posture rigid, her eyes darting towards Mr. Finch's antique leather briefcase as if trying to divine its contents. They were confident, their arrogance a palpable force in the room. They had subtly, and not so subtly, maneuvered themselves into prime position, believing they had outmaneuvered everyone else. The other relatives, less prominent, less aggressive, looked on with a mixture of hope and resignation, their expectations considerably lower. Mr. Finch, a man of precise movements and an equally precise mind, cleared his throat, the sound a surprisingly loud punctuation in the tense silence. Ladies and gentlemen, we are gathered here today to review the preliminary instructions regarding Mr. Augustus Thorne's estate, given his unfortunate absence. His gaze lingered for a moment on Barnaby and Lorelei, a faint flicker of something unreadable in his eyes, a knowing glint that went unnoticed by the couple. Suddenly, a commotion erupted at the main entrance. The heavy oak doors, usually kept closed and guarded, swung open with a dramatic creak that echoed through the vast hall. All heads snapped towards the sound, their expressions ranging from annoyance to mild curiosity. Standing silhouetted against the bright morning light, no longer stooped, no longer frail, was a figure that sent a ripple of collective shock, then outright disbelief, through the room. It was Augustus Thorne. But not the Augustus Thorne they had last seen. He was impeccably dressed in a tailored charcoal suit that fit him perfectly, his silver hair neatly combed and gleaming, his features sharp and commanding, radiating an almost intimidating presence. Gone was the disoriented gaze, his eyes, now piercing and clear, swept over the stunned faces in the room, taking in every detail of their reactions. He walked with a firm, deliberate stride, a powerful presence that filled the vast room, diminishing everyone else to mere shadows. Behind him, almost an afterthought, a security detail stood, silent and imposing, a visible reminder of his true power. Barnaby's jaw dropped, literally, his smug expression replaced by one of utter bewilderment. Lorelei's perfectly composed face drained of all color, her hand flying to her mouth to stifle a gasp that escaped anyway. The other relatives gasped, a few murmuring in disbelief, others rubbing their eyes as if to clear a hallucination. Mr. Finch, however, remained perfectly composed, a small, knowing smile finally appearing on his lips, a silent acknowledgement of the master playwright's grand finale. Augustus stopped in the center of the room, directly facing Barnaby and Lorelei, his presence a towering judgment. His gaze was unwavering, cold, and utterly devoid of warmth, a look that promised reckoning. "Good morning, Barnaby." "Lorelei." His voice, the booming, resonant voice of the billionaire, a voice they had only recently heard feigned as a feeble rasp, echoed through the stunned silence. "Forgive my tardiness. I merely wished to ensure all my valued beneficiaries were present for this rather important reading." He savored the moment, the dawning horror in their eyes. Barnaby, finally finding his voice, stammered, "Augustus. But, we thought, you were missing. Your health." He gestured wildly, his composure utterly shattered, his carefully constructed world collapsing around him. He looked like a man who had seen a ghost. Augustus raised a hand, cutting him off with a gesture of finality. "My health, Barnaby, is perfectly fine. My memory, however, is exceptional. I recall every word. Every glance. Every gesture." His eyes then fixed on Barnaby and Lorelei, narrowing, an icy accusation in their depths. "And speaking of memory, Barnaby, Lorelei, do you recall a certain Arthur? A distant, impoverished relative who recently sought solace and assistance at these very gates?" Barnaby paled, his skin taking on a sickly greenish hue. Lorelei's eyes darted around the room, seeking an escape route, a way to deny, to deflect, but there was nowhere to hide. The realization, slow and horrifying, began to dawn on them, a cold dread creeping into their very bones. The truth, cold and unforgiving, slapped them across the face with brutal force. Augustus stepped closer, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper, yet still carrying to every corner of the room, chilling everyone present. He was, you see, a test. A simple, yet profound test of character. A man stripped of his fortune, his status, his very identity. A man who was merely seeking a little human kindness, a moment of compassion. He paused, allowing his words to sink in, to twist in their guts, to fester. "And you, Barnaby," And you, Lorelei, failed spectacularly. You saw a nuisance, a burden, an obstacle. You saw everything but a human being in need. He turned to Mr. Finch, a signal. Mr. Finch, if you please, we can now proceed with the final will. The one drafted this morning, reflecting the true intentions of my estate. The one based not on bloodlines, but on the true measure of a human heart. He offered a subtle nod, a silent command. The room was silent, save for the faint sounds of Barnaby's ragged breathing and Lorelei's almost imperceptible whimper, a sound of utter defeat. The masks had fallen. The game was truly over. The aftermath of Augustus Thorne's shocking revelation was swift, brutal, and utterly devastating for Barnaby and Lorelei. Mr. Finch, with a solemn but unwavering voice, began to read the new will, each clause a hammer blow to their carefully constructed world, shattering it piece by piece. The first blow landed as Mr. Finch declared that Barnaby Thorne was not only disinherited from any significant portion of the Thorne fortune but was also stripped of his executive position within Thorne Renewables. The substantial shares he had been promised, the coveted board seat he had anticipated, the trust fund he had been certain was his, all were irrevocably reallocated. Barnaby's face, already ashen, crumpled further, his eyes wide with a desperate, disbelieving horror. He tried to protest, stammering about his years of loyal service and his dedication to the family name, but Augustus merely raised a dismissive hand, silencing him with a gaze more potent than any words. Loyalty, Barnaby, he interjected, his voice chillingly calm, slicing through Barnaby's pathetic pleas, is not defined by how quickly one assumes control of a dying man's assets. It is defined by compassion, by integrity, by genuine care, qualities you seem to lack entirely. Lorelei, whose inheritance was largely tied to Barnaby's position and direct marriage to a Thorne heir, found herself similarly destitute. Her meticulously planned future, filled with private jets, exclusive social events, endless shopping sprees in Paris, and a life of effortless luxury, evaporated like mist, leaving only a bitter void. She burst into furious tears, her carefully applied makeup streaking down her face, a grotesque mask of her unraveling. "This is outrageous," she shrieked, her voice high-pitched and unhinged, pointing a trembling finger at Augustus. "You can't do this. We're family. This is unjust." Augustus merely chuckled, a dry, mirthless sound that sent shivers down the spines of the other relatives, a sound utterly devoid of humor. "Family? Is that what you called it, Lorelei, when you openly discussed having Arthur thrown into an institution, or perhaps roughed up, by my security?" His gaze flickered towards the security guards, who stood impassively at the entrance. "Gentlemen, if I recall, you were given very specific instructions to observe, not to act, unless in the case of genuine harm. Your reports, I might add, were quite thorough, detailing every cruel remark, every dismissive gesture." The guards, loyal to Augustus for decades, remained silent, their stoic presence a testament to his meticulous planning and their unwavering allegiance. The humiliation was complete. Barnaby and Lorelei, stripped of their power, their future, and their dignity, were escorted from the manor by the same security detail that had been ordered to keep Arthur out. They were left with little more than their personal belongings and a stark reminder that true wealth was not measured in gold, but in integrity, and that their deficit was profound, a gaping wound in their character. Their once grand aspirations lay in tatters at their feet. The remaining, less avaricious relatives received modest, but fair, inheritances, a testament to Augustus's belief that not all of his bloodline was tainted, just those who had been most predatory and opportunistic. Then came the revelation that truly shocked the room, and especially one quiet, unassuming housemaid named Elara. Her presence, humble and understated, in the back of the room, was a stark contrast to the opulent surroundings. Mr. Finch cleared his throat once more, his eyes scanning the room until they landed on Elara, who had been standing humbly at the back, preparing to clear away the empty teacups, observing the unfolding drama with wide, innocent eyes. Her heart had ached for the sudden downfall of Barnaby and Lorelei, even as she recognized the justice in it. She had no idea she was about to become the center of Augustus's final, most profound act. And finally, Mr. Finch announced, his voice filled with a quiet reverence that held the attention of every person present, to Elara. Elara, the housemaid, for her unwavering kindness, her selfless compassion, and her pure heart, Mr. Augustus Thorne bequeaths the entirety of his remaining fortune, including Thorne Manor, the controlling shares of Thorne Renewables, and all liquid assets, to be held in trust in her name, with a dedicated team of financial advisors and legal counsel to assist her in managing this immense responsibility. A pin could have dropped and shattered the silence. The air seemed to freeze. Elara gasped, her hand flying to her mouth, her eyes welling up with tears of utter disbelief. She swayed slightly, utterly overwhelmed by the incomprehensible weight of the words. She, Elara, the quiet maid who earned meager wages, who cleaned floors and made beds, was now the owner of Thorne Manor, the matriarch of a renewable energy empire, a billionaire overnight. It was incomprehensible, a fantasy come to life. Augustus, his face softening for the first time that day, walked directly to Elara. He took her hands, his touch gentle, reassuring. "Elara," he said, his voice quiet, filled with a warmth that had been absent moments before, a genuine affection. "You, and only you, saw a human being when others saw only a burden. You offered kindness when others offered scorn. You gave freely of your limited resources, your time, your compassion, with no expectation of reward. That, Elara, is the true wealth. And it is yours now. All of it." Elara, barely able to speak through her tears, could only nod, tears streaming down her face, her mind reeling. "Sir. Mr. Thorne. I don't understand. I just tried to help an old man. Any old man." Her simple words, spoken from the heart, only confirmed Augustus's profound decision. Augustus smiled, a genuine, peaceful smile that reached his eyes. "Precisely, Elara. Precisely." He looked around at the stunned faces of the remaining relatives, a clear message in his gaze, a final, unyielding lesson. The true character of a person is revealed not in how they treat those who can benefit them, but in how they treat those who can do nothing for them. Elara treated Arthur with more dignity and respect than Barnaby and Lorelei showed their own benefactor and family. The other staff members, who had also gathered, watched with a mixture of awe and quiet satisfaction. They had seen Elara's kindness, her quiet dedication, her selflessness. They had also seen Barnaby and Lorelei's cruelty. This outcome, though fantastical and beyond anything they could have imagined, felt, to them, like a cosmic justice, a divine retribution. Elara, the unsung hero, had received her unimaginable reward. Months later, Thorne Manor hummed with a different energy, a more benevolent, purposeful hum. Elara, still somewhat bewildered by the enormity of her inheritance, had embraced her new role with a quiet grace and an inherent sense of responsibility that astonished even Augustus. She had retained the loyal staff, ensuring their livelihoods and even improving their working conditions. She had established foundations dedicated to supporting local communities, funding educational scholarships, and investing heavily in innovative renewable energy projects, echoing Augustus's own passions. She had even, with Augustus's subtle guidance and the diligent support of Mr. Finch and his team, begun to learn the intricacies of the business, her natural intelligence and genuine desire to do good proving to be a formidable combination. She sought wisdom, not just profit. Augustus, now truly retired, lived a life of peaceful contemplation in a discreet wing of the manor, or sometimes, at his smaller, secluded cottage, finding solace in the quiet simplicity. He watched Elara with immense satisfaction, her actions a testament to the enduring power of compassion and the profound wisdom of his choice. He had found his true heir, not among his bloodline, but in a heart of gold. The vast fortune, once a source of bitter disappointment and a catalyst for his elaborate test, had become an instrument of profound good in the hands of someone truly deserving. He often found Alara, still modest in her demeanor despite her new status, bringing him a cup of tea, or simply sitting with him, sharing quiet moments of genuine companionship. Their bond, forged in a crucible of deception and revealed kindness, was now unbreakable, a quiet testament to a unique friendship. Barnaby and Lorelei, stripped of their lavish lifestyle and social standing, found themselves adrift, scorned by the very circles they had desperately sought to impress. Their network of fair-weather friends vanished overnight, their credit lines dried up, and their carefully cultivated image crumbled into dust, exposing the hollow core beneath. They were forced to sell their opulent home, their luxury cars, and anything else of value to pay off debts they had accrued in anticipation of Augustus's fortune. They were a cautionary tale, whispered about in elite circles, their names synonymous with greed and hubris, a vivid example of how ambition, unchecked by morality, could lead to utter ruin. Their fall was as public and humiliating as their ambition had been overt. The world, with its relentless pursuit of material gain, often blinds individuals to the true treasures that lie within human connection and selfless giving. Augustus Thorne's final act was not merely a test of character, but a profound statement, that true worth is not accumulated in vaults, but cultivated in the heart. It is in the darkest moments, when all external markers of status and power are stripped away, that the genuine character of a person shines brightest. And in a world often dominated by self-interest, the quiet acts of pure, unadulterated kindness will always, in the end, find their unimaginable reward. If this story of unexpected twists and the triumph of kindness resonated with you, imagine what other tales lie hidden. We have many more stories that delve into the depths of human nature, testing the limits of greed and showcasing the power of compassion. Make sure you don't miss out on our next compelling narrative by hitting that subscribe button right now and turning on notifications. What did you think of Augustus's ingenious test? Did you predict Alara would be the one to inherit everything? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below, we love hearing from you.